Okay. As I said, rather than me just talking academically, intellectually about human livelihoods, which I think is doesn't do it justice, right? Is a little rude. Instead, I'm going to ask you to look at a variety of case studies. I'm going to present you each of these case studies, just a summary of them. And in your homework, you're going to be asked to choose one, read more about it, and really get to know, get to understand just one of these case studies. I'm going to introduce them all to you now. Just know that as I'm introducing them, you get to choose just one. And do that for your homework. I strongly suggest you do this before coming to class so you get that first question in your homework done. So the first case study is about how climate change can compromise culture and identity. So we're going to be looking up at the Inuit communities in northern Canada, Greenland, Alaska, and I apologize if I mispronounce this, Chukotka in Russia. All of these communities contain 160,000 Inuit people, and they have witnessed the changing of the natural environment as a result of global warming for almost 20 years, probably longer than that. Right. So I know we think of climate change as like happening now, but really being an issue in the future. Well, for people who live near the poles, it is our future, right? They've already been experiencing this very rapid global warming that has been changing their way of life. So as the ice is lost, ancient traditions and unique form of knowledge is lost with it, right? So for example, elders have been reluctant to pass down traditional methods of predicting the weather and other things like that because they're becoming less accurate with climate change, right? Their old stories, their old methods, their own skills are becoming irrelevant in modern generations. So they're losing that part of their culture. Additionally, traditional practices like burying fish in the ground to ferment for food is now a lot harder. So they're not only losing, their skills, they're losing their practices and they're losing their food. So this is a quote by an older Inuit woman who said, climate change is so real up here, it's my life, right? It's not just something that she occasionally thinks about, that she occasionally worries about. It's something that she sees every single day because it impacts the way that she interacts with the younger generations in her family. Right, so if you are interested in that, learning about how climate change can impact culture and identity, focus on this case study going to this link. The next case study we're going to look at is about climate refugees, right? When their way of life is altered so much that they can no longer stay where they are at and they have to migrate unwillingly. So migration has always been a way of life in the Sahel. The Sahel is an arid belt of land that stretches across Africa, shown here in orange. And many of the region's 100 million inhabitants have lived for a really, really long time, for millennia, as nomadic pastoralists, meaning that season to season, their communities migrate. They are used to that. They migrate with their herds in search of water and pasture. However, recently, changes in rainfall patterns and rising temperatures have made it so that they can no longer go along their normal migration routes or normal timing. Instead, they have to move due to the climate. And today there are 3.1 million environmental refugees in the Sahel, where normally they would move from place to place to follow the water. Well, now there's nowhere with water to go to, so they have to migrate elsewhere and give up their way of life and their previous homelands. Right, so this is in a picture of a refugee camp. You can see that they have set up these temporary white roofed buildings, and this is where people have had to abandon their herds, abandon their pasture, and come here as refugees. Right. So if you're interested in this and the climate refugee crisis, you will click on this link to read more about that. All right, next up is conflict, right? As we know, many, many things start wars, right? We cannot say that climate change is the sole cause of war. What we can say is that wars are more likely when there is a crisis, insecurity, which can cause political conflict that could lead to a war. So we are seeing a lot of modern wars that we think, again, were not solely caused by climate change, but when climate change was a multiplier of existing threats to livelihood, right? So several studies suggest that climate change makes conflicts such as civil war and genocide more likely. And it's because it's a threat multiplier, right? It amplifies problems that already exist. So when poverty or political instability or crime already exist, and then on top of that, people are experiencing droughts and floods and heat waves, they get desperate and there can be lots of conflict that could eventually lead to war. Right. So for example, Syria has experienced 3 extreme droughts since the 1980s. And as a result of this, their area has become desertified. 800,000 people have lost their income. 85% of the country's livestock has died. This means food prices have doubled, and 1.5 million rural workers have moved from their traditional homes to the cities for more work. This means that there are a lot of really desperate people living in a very concentrated environment, making them easier targets for terrorist recruiters. And we think all of these stressors have contributed to the start of the Syrian civil war, which broke out in 2011 and is still ongoing. So if you're interested in this, you're going to go to this website. Again, choose just one, but I want you to really spend some time with it and learn about the intricacies of how climate change has impacted each of these communities. And when you get to class, we will talk about all 3 of them.